All right, this is lesson 6, animating layers. So we're going to go in here and animate a layered Adobe Photoshop file. We're going to create an expression using the pick whip. We'll work with imported Photoshop layer styles. We'll apply a track mat so that we can control then what's visible on those layers. We'll animate a layer using the corner pin effect. We'll use time remapping and the layer panel to dynamically retime some footage. And then we'll go in and look at using the graph editor to time remap keyframes as well. So you want to go ahead and open up After Effects. We're going to work off of a new project. Once we bring that up, we're just going to go ahead and do a file, save as, save as. Navigate to wherever you have your file saved at. I'm just going to call this lesson 6 finished. Then from here, we want to go ahead and import what it is that we want to use. In this case, there's a marquee.psd file. So you can either hit Command-I, you can double-click inside the project panel, navigate to your lesson 6. Inside the assets, you'll find only one file, which is a Photoshop document. Now, with this being a Photoshop document, this is already created as a layered file. So we want to go ahead and make sure that we import this as a composition. And we want to retain layer sizes. So it's going to match up with everything that's already inside of there. And once we go through and we select that and we click on open, we're going to get our dialog box that pops up going into what do we want to end up doing with this. So we're going to go ahead and bring this in. We want to make sure that editable layer styles is selected. It's the reason why we chose composition. Retain layer sizes is so that we can work with the individual layers that are in there. So we're going to go ahead and keep that as editable layer styles and go ahead and click on OK, which should give you now a composition called Marquee. And you'll also find a folder inside of there with the Marquee layers. Now if we go and we toggle that open, we will see the different layers that are available to us based upon then the file. We can also come up here, we can resize this, bring this out so we can see what's there. If we wanted to adjust what's inside or what's visible related to our project panel, we could do that as well. Now I can expand that out, but I just want to be able to see in here. So we see that we have our lit marquee, we have a scroll area, a scroll text, a show title, a starburst, and the unlit marquee, which are all of our layers that'll be inside of the document when we go in and open that up. So that marquee composition, those are already built for us. So if we go ahead and double click on marquee composition, what you're going to find then is here is our composition that was built for us. If you go ahead and hit the space bar and play it, you're going to see right now nothing's animated. We haven't gone in and done anything else with it. This is a way as you go through and you start working with other applications, it's important to go through and start to map out and storyboard what it is that you're going to have occur so that when you go through and build it inside of Photoshop or Illustrator, that we are able to build it in a way that we are going to be able to animate the content as we bring it into After Effects. So with this right now, like I said, nothing is animated in here. We have this open. Currently, it is set to 20 seconds. You can see that over here on the far right. We can also go to end. You see 1924. This is at 25 frames per second. So with that, we want to go ahead and shorten this down. So let's go ahead and go over to our composition settings. Inside of here, you'll see our frame rate. There's that 25. We come down here to duration. Duration is currently set to 20 seconds. We want to go ahead and set that to 10 seconds. So you can go ahead and highlight the value, key in 1000. You'll see over there on the base 25, it shows us at 10 seconds. We can go ahead and hit return. And now we have a composition that's only 10 seconds in length. So what we want to do is we want to go in and begin to work with the lighting that is inside of our composition. So what we have is we have the light that's here. We want to go ahead and animate that content. So let's go ahead and jump out to our 4-second mark. This is where we actually want the marquee to go from appearing dark, and then we want to go ahead and lighten up. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and play with the transparency of one of our layers. So the lit marquee side of it, we're going to play with the transparency on there to adjust what's going to happen and animate the lights actually coming on over time. So we're going to go ahead and select our lit marquee layer. With this set, we want to go ahead and view our opacity value. What's the shortcut key for opacity? T. So we're going to press T, which is going to toggle open our opacity. Again, remember that one based upon the fact of transparency. Now, once we go up and have it at this point, we are at the 4-second mark. So make sure that your timeline is at 4 seconds, or that you're paying attention to where your playhead is at 4 seconds as well. Now on here, once we pull it up, we're going to go ahead and come over and click on the stopwatch next to opacity. It's going to create us our initial keyframe. At this point, you'll see opacity says 100%. So we are able to see that at 100%. We're going to go ahead and jump back to the beginning. And at this point, let's go ahead and drop the opacity down to 0%. So now you can see what has just happened to that. So if we look at it, we jump to the keyframe, lights are all on the marquee. We jump back before, the lights are actually off. Remember, we can toggle between keyframes over here with next keyframe, previous keyframe. So in this case, it's a quick way for us to jump back and forth to see what's happening with our marquee. So now we've gone down and put it on there. So what you'll also see if we go through and we hit the space bar on that is you'll see that it slowly is going to go and illuminate. So we have that set. So over the course of the first 4 seconds of this animation, the marquee lights slowly actually come up and are lit. So I'm going to save that since we've gone through and created some action on here. So the other thing we have then is there's a few different layers on there, including that starburst layer. The starburst layer that we have on there includes a bevel and emboss layer style to it. We're going to go in and we're actually going to animate that bevel. So what's going to happen is it's going to make the little starburst, and that's the area up where it says tickets on sale now, that area behind there. We're going to go ahead and work with that to make it appear as though it's backlit and lights up just the same as the marquee does as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the pick whip. What's going to happen with the pick whip is it just simply goes in and it duplicates an action. So instead of going through and adjusting everything individually, we can actually grab a hold of the pick whip and move it down to another layer, and it will pull from that area. So let's go ahead and jump back to the beginning of our timeline. And then we're going to come over here to our starburst layer. We're going to go ahead and toggle open the starburst. And then, as we said, there are layer styles. And we see we have our bevel and emboss layer style inside of here. So let's go ahead and toggle that open. At this time, if necessary, you may need to go in and expand your view. This is where we can go ahead and we can use the tilde key, which is just to the left of the 1, which is a shortcut to go through and maximize any of your panels. And this will just give us a chance to go in here and see what's in here and not be working with the small real estate down on the bottom of it. Now in here, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and take and use the opacity from the lit marquee to impact what's going on inside of that starburst layer. So inside of our starburst layer, what we're going to find is we have this depth value. If we come over here, this little spiral over here, this is our pick whip. So you'll see it says property pick whip. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to click on here and we're going to drag down to the word opacity underneath lit marquee. We'll see it gets highlighted. Once you go ahead and let go of that, you'll then see that your depth goes and turns into red. Just indicating to us based upon where we're at that we're going to go through, and that value is going to change. If you go ahead and scrub across, that value is actually going to change based upon what is there. If we toggle open that depth and you look at there's the expression. So in this case, it's pulling from there. So if we look out here, this is the way the coding is. This comp dot layer, so is tied into lit marquee, transform opacity, indicating that it's going to transform with the opacity that's coming from the lit marquee layer. And if I remember right, that's Python is what they're using when they go through and they look at expressions. So if you learn Python, you can write out all your own expressions without having to deal with even going in with the pick whip. Because if I come up here on this, we can actually go ahead and you'll see if you double click on it, we have a single line of code that's allowing us to go in and edit what is there. So if you have that set, if I go ahead and toggle that back closed, zoom back out, hit tilde to come back down here. Now if we go through and work with it, if you look at where it says tickets on sale now, you'll see it goes from having nothing behind it to looking as though it's backlit. As you bring that up, you'll see the light comes up at the same rate that we have with the marquee lights. So if that worked, let's go ahead and we'll just toggle closed all of the properties down there and go ahead and save what is there. Once again, if you do hit the space bar, you're going to see that it's going to go through. It's going to play itself up. And you can see both of those actions taking place at the same time. Stopping at any time after the 4-second mark, since at that point all of your changes have actually gone through there. Now when you go through and you start working on, like I said, laying things out, think about how you can use the layer styles inside of there. So when we're in Photoshop, remember we have the effects options in the bottom of our layers panel. Think about how you can use those. What are the things that are available inside of there? If we start dealing with shadows, we can go in and simulate movement, simulate depth, give us that 3D feeling without having to actually work with 3D objects, and then getting into dealing with the 3D widget and that as well. So start to think about that as you build those items up, being aware of what you need to go in and modify. Now you may have noticed that across the bottom of the marquee, we've got that black area. It's kind of like a ticker that run across the bottom of a TV screen. And we have the metal on each side. We see our text that's in there. We want the text to only appear inside of that marquee area, so that black field that is on there. To do that, we're going to utilize a track mat, which will confine the animation to be visible just inside of those areas. So we want to go in and we want to have that start to scroll after the marquee lights up. So we know that our marquee lights up at the 4-second mark, which means we need to make this come in after that. So we're powered up, and then that's going to start to tick across there. So let's go over to the 4:10 mark, which is going to give us just shy of half a second after the marquee fully lights up that this is going to work its way into view on there. So let's go ahead and we're going to select the layer called scroll text. And while we're at the 410 area, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and set an endpoint. That's when we want that layer to show up. Now we're not going in and making anything disappear in the sense of the text. It's not changing the location of it or anything other than the fact that it's just not going to be visible to that point. So to go in and do that, we're simply going to hold down Option and hit the left bracket key, or some people say the begin brackets. So when we go ahead and hit that, you're going to see that inside of our timeline that it goes in and it clips and gets rid of everything that was before that. So it only begins here at 410. So if I move this back one frame, you'll see that the text up here is gone. As soon as I bounce that to that 410 mark, that text is going to show up. So all we've done is just simply set ourselves an endpoint. Now we want to go ahead and we want to adjust where our text is at. So with the scroll text layer selected, we're going to go ahead and hit P for our position. And we'll see those values come out of there. We can go ahead and we can adjust that. Remember, we can grab a hold of this and we can just simply move it if we want to. It's one way to go through and work with it, to drag it off of our screen. The other thing we can also do is we can come in here with our position properties and we can key in values that they're working off of based upon what is here. So 4994 for the X and 1106 for the Y. And that's going to place it right there. So it's partially into there. So it's just come on to the track mat area. Remember, as we go through and we start looking at these animations, a lot of this stuff is probably going to be done by you visually. So as you go through and look at it, you're going to move it, you're going to position it where you like what it looks like. And then as we go through to move it across the screen, again, you're going to drag it across the screen to a location in which you want it to go in and end. So at the 410 mark here, this is where we have this at. This is where we want this to show up at. So on our position property, we're going to go ahead and click on our stopwatch, giving us our initial keyframe. And then we want to move to the end of our timeline. So we're just going to hit end on the keyboard. Or you can grab a hold of the playhead and drag it all the way to the right if you're working on a short keyboard that doesn't have the extra functions to it. And then we want to go ahead and adjust the position of our text. Now once again, we can go ahead and we can drag this across. You'll see that you'll have the motion line. Remember, that's what this line is. It comes across there. That's our motion path. It's the path that's going to actually travel along. We're going to go ahead and drag this across so that this comes out and all the way across our screen. Now you can go ahead and you can look at that line. You can see where the line goes through. That gives us that nice straight line to work with. We can go ahead and we can drop it into a location. We can also key in the value so they're not taking it quite all the way across as it works. So they're bringing it out just until the date gets on the screen, which is at the 462 and 2121. So you can see this is where they're dragging it to on a location-wise. Now what happens if we decide we want to move that and we move that all the way across the screen? What's going to happen to our ticker? It's just going to move faster, right? So all we're doing with that as we start to look at what's going to happen with that is the farther we move it in a shorter period of time, the faster it's ultimately going to move. So with that, again, it's a preference as you go through and move it on there. Once you are happy with that, you should see your two keyframes. If you wanted to, this is where we can jump to the previous keyframe. We can just go ahead and play it. You can watch ticker move across there. And then, of course, mine's set to loop on preview. So there we have that going through and running. If you play it and you decide that you want to do something a little different or it's not moving the way you want it to, remember, we can just go back to those keyframes. We can always change the position at any time. Just make sure that you're actually on the keyframe. If you're back there, you're one frame off or two frames off, of course, it's going to mess things up because it's going to jump from keyframe to keyframe, and it's going to cause your stuff to bounce around. So once you're happy with that, go ahead and save that. And then we want to go ahead and come in here. We have our scroll area. So when we go through and we start looking at our scroll area, that's that black box that's on there. Well, we want to go ahead and we want to utilize that area to become the area that's essentially going to mask off that space. But in this case, since we're not actually working with a mask in the sense of going through and truly drawing a mask, that's what we'll do in lesson 7. We're actually going to use this as a track mat. So it's just going to mat and say this is where we want this to go ahead and show up at. So let's go ahead and grab that scroll area. And we want to go ahead and duplicate that. So we're going to go ahead and have that selected. We're just going to come up here and do Edit Duplicate. You can also hit Command D. And you'll see it comes up called Scroll Area 2. Now in there we want to make sure that our Scroll Area 2 is above our scroll text. So we're going to drag that up over top of it. Now when we go through and we do that, you're going to notice that it now overlaps it. Because it's like any other application. As we go through and start to build that, the things at the top are the things that are visible. Things as we start to work our way down below become objects that go behind those upper layers. So once we have it duplicated and we have that located above that, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and make sure that we are in our settings so that we can see our track mat column. So if for some reason you aren't in this setting, if you happen to be over in switches like this, so you'll see we don't have a track matte option. This is where we, of course, have our blur. We have the ability to go through and start to work with adjustment layers and whether or not something's 3D. What we're going to do is when we come down to the bottom, toggle switches and modes, you'll see we have track matte here. Down here we have our scroll area 2, and we also have our scroll text. What we're going to do is we want to go ahead and take our scroll text, and we click on the area underneath the track matte. You're going to see there's alpha matte, scroll area, alpha inverted matte, luma matte, and luma inverted. So we're going down here and we choose alpha matte. So we want that alpha matte scroll area 2, which is going to go through and use what we have as the selection as the area. If you choose inverted, what's going to happen with that is you're going to see only the stuff that's outside of it, which essentially takes us back to what it looked like before. So in this case, we want to go ahead and choose alpha matte. And you should find that your text is only inside of the area that you went in there and selected. So if we go ahead and we deselect all of that, I'm going to go ahead and save. Now if we go back to home and we play it, you see it's going to work out at that 410 mark. You should start to see your text show up inside of that area. It's going to go ahead and scroll itself across and then stop once you get all the way through there. So it's a chance to preview what is there. So this allows us to go in and start to work with the track matte, which allows us to see what is there. There's a lot of ways we can go through and we can work with that. We can cause that matte to move. So if we do something in that and we move it across the screen, we can have an effect that's going to show up as it moves through there. Then we want to go through and add ourselves a little bit of motion blur to it. When we go through and we start to look at how are we working with a motion blur, and we start thinking about camera shutters, it's capturing what's there, how many frames per second are we catching. It can impact screen flickers and things like that. So let's go ahead and make this look a little bit more authentic. As you saw it going across there, it's really solid. So we want to go ahead and add ourselves a motion blur to that. So we're going to go ahead and drag ourselves out here somewhere. They're around 8 seconds. We're just going to drag out here to where we can see the text that is there. What we're going to do is we want to go ahead and turn on the motion blur for our text layer. So once again, we can toggle switches and modes. Remember, we have our scroll text. So let's go ahead and come in here and turn on our motion blur for our scroll text. You'll see up here at the top of the screen, motion blur is on. It's highlighted in blue. And then what we can also do inside of here is if we go back into our composition settings, there's an advanced tab up here. Now inside of this advanced tab, we can go in here, we can change our shutter angle. So we can go in and look at it from a standpoint of what do we want to adjust this for. This here's going to actually go through and imitate what would happen if we adjust the shutter angle on a real camera. So that's going to go through and start to look at how long is that camera aperture going to ultimately be open collecting light. So what happens with that, the larger values that we have is going to create more of a motion blur. Why is that? So it's going to allow distortion because when we go through and we start talking about that, so when we talk about how long an aperture is open, it's open. As it's open, when we go through and like we start shooting sports photography, of course, we're taking that up to 1/2000th of a second. So it's click. I mean, it's open and shut. We extend how long that's open. What ends up happening is it's capturing, it's picking the stuff up in the sensor. When it closes, an object is more likely to move a little bit. So as we go through and increase that, that motion blur is going to increase because it's actually capturing more of it as it goes through and changes. So right now, we come here and look at our shutter angle. Our shutter angle is currently set at 180. We're going to go ahead and divide that in half, set that down to 90. And then we're going to go in and adjust then our shutter phase. We're going to go ahead and set that down to 0. So when you go ahead and you do that now, if you go in and start to look at and play it, you're going to see how you get that blur going on now as it begins to move across that marquee. So now we go through and we have that and we start to look at what's going on with this. There's going to be things you like about it. There may be things that you want to go in and change. So right now the marquee's starting to look pretty good. But what's going to happen with this is that starburst we have up there for the tickets on sale now isn't very noticeable over top of everything else. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in, we're going to use the corner pin effect. When we add a corner pin effect, what you're going to see is that it's going to create 4 points. Those 4 pins can all be modified individually, which allows us to move them based on location. You can even animate corner pins if you want to as well. So let's jump back to that 4-second mark. So in this case, we're back before the stuff is up on the marquee. And what we want to do is we want to go ahead and solo out a couple areas over here. So when we go in and we start to look at, you'll see this little dot here. That's our solo. What's going to happen is it's going to hide all non-solo video. So when we go in and we start to think about soloing things, if we click that solo button on, that's the only thing we're seeing. If we click on another solo button, we can add to what is there. So we know that we want to see the starburst. So as soon as I click on solo for the starburst, notice that everything else disappears on the composition window. So you're not seeing it. It still all exists. We haven't made it disappear. If I render it out, it's still going to render everything else out with it. We're going to go ahead and turn that on for that starburst layer and also for our show title. So then you should see something that looks about like this. So now we want to go in and we want to adjust and add our corner pin effects. So let's go ahead and select our starburst layer. And then we're going to come up here to our effects and presets. And I'm simply going to go ahead and start to type in. You're going to see under distort we have corner pin. So if we go ahead and we double click on that corner pin, what you're going to see then is that we have the selection. Then you're going to see in each of the 4 corners, you're going to see those little circles. Those little circles relate then to the location, which you're going to see over here. So this is telling me where corner pin 1 is, upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right. You'll see they all have stopwatches, so we can go through and we can animate those individual values. So once you notice that's there, if for some reason you clicked and you see that you get the 4 pins going around the outside of where you have the show title, go ahead and undo or delete the effect and go in and add it onto the starburst. We're going to make sure you are at the 4-second mark, and we're going to go ahead and start keyframes. So we're going to keyframe all 4 of them. The easy way is just to simply click on the top, hold down the mouse, and drag through all of the stopwatches. That's going to go ahead and set you an initial keyframe for all of those objects. And then we want to go ahead and adjust this a little bit. So at this point, let's move forward about 2 seconds to the 6-second mark. And then let's go in and adjust the handles on there. Now we can grab a hold of them. So if I come in here and I grab a hold of it, you'll notice I can do whatever I want with this. I can drag that out. I can drag that out. As we move them, this is a plane that it's kind of working with. So when we go through, you're going to see it starts to move almost in a 3D sense because of the way that those pins go through and work. Now we can drag them around and you get them to the way you want them to look. We can also go in and key in values. So we can key in values as well. So you can see here, if I zoom out real quick, you can see what's going on with that. You can tell by the way it looks that that's not going to be. So it's got a heavy distortion to it. There we go. So with that, these are the values at that 6-second mark that you're going to want to have to allow you to adjust what it is that you are seeing. Actually, the top one's not even right. It's negative 63. Yeah, that looks better. So that allows that little bit of change. You can scroll if you want to see how it goes through and changes. You can see it moves a little bit. Once you get those set, we'll jump out to the 8-second mark, and we'll tweak these a little bit. So that's where you're going to be at on the 8-second mark. Remember, as you go through and you move those points, it's possible to also be essentially doing a little bit of rotation based upon where you put all of those. So once those work, you'll see there. Now if we go through and start to look at it, you'll see how it twists. Just using that corner pin effect, essentially stretching each of the corners where we want to move them at. Once you're happy with how those corner pins all look, you can go ahead and you can save that. Again, if we go home, let's go ahead and unsolo each of those. Now if we go through and play it, you're going to see it's going to come up. Once it comes up and comes on, now the ticker starts going, and we see tickets on sale now. It's going to move a little just to bring some attention to that area. Now as we go through and work with it, what we really have going on here is we have the marquee come on as it works through. We want to go ahead and darken up the rest of it. So we see we have the building and everything up here. So we want to go ahead and simulate what's going to happen as we darken the sky. So as the lights come on, we want the sky and the building then to darken up and remain dark as the marquee and sign and starburst, all those things go through and move. So let's go ahead and we're going to go back to the home area. So back to 0. So start of our timeline. And we want to come down and we're going to select our lit marquee layer. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to duplicate that. So I'm going to hit Command D. So we have our lit marquee 2 layer then. So we're going to come directly above the lit marquee. And with that, we're going to come to the top of our screen. We're going to choose our pen tool. So we're going to come all the way up here. We're going to choose our pen tool. We grab the pen tool. What we're going to do is we're going to go out here and we want to draw in our area that we want to go through and mask out. So we're going to come here to the top of our marquee. Now you can see there's some lights right here. This is also a piece of the marquee. If you look at this really closely, you can see what's going on here. So there's the additional lights there. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here because this face is towards us. This is the area that's picking up additional light. So let's go ahead and come in here. We're going to go ahead and click at the top of marquee. It's going to give us our initial point that's there. We're going to come down here, and I'm looking at the visual line going from the first point down to where I'm at. I'm going to go off of the board a little bit. And I'm going to try to follow that line down. If you come down and you click on it, you don't like the way it looks, you can go ahead and just undo, and then go and click again. And then we want to go ahead and come up here to the top. So we're going to stay off of our pasteboard. So don't be afraid to go in there and draw outside of the confines of it. Then we want to go ahead and bring it over here to the right. Again, we're looking at, we see where this is coming up at. So we want to bring it out over here. Then we want to bring that back down here to the edge of our sign. Since it's a theater sign, the sign's going to be lit as well. So let's come down to this intersection. Then we're going to come up to the base of the sign. I'm going to work out to the point. We can fine tune this in a minute. Come back through here. Come up here off of it. And I want to get over top of the line. We go over top of the path you've already been drawing. You're going to see the plus come next to the pen, indicating we're going to add a point on that line right there. That's not what we want to have done. We want to be down below that. So we can go ahead and click, give us that straight line. We're coming straight across that theater sign. Come down here, pick up this point. And then we're going to go ahead and we'll put one out here on the center, another that I'm going to bring in to here. And then what we have is we have this part of the sign, but since it's not illuminated, we're going to go ahead and come in here, and I'm going to follow this area down, which probably on the other side I could have done as well. So again, we're just looking at points where things are going to change at. Let's go ahead and bring this back down to the end. And then we're going to go back. Eventually, you're going to get back to the start point. What you're going to see when you bring your pen over top of the initial point, you're going to see a circle. You can think of that however you want. Circle being a closed path, O meaning origin. Just know that when we go in back over that, when we click on that, it's going to go ahead and complete what we have as our path. So as you go through and you begin drawing and working with things, it's a little bit different than just a basic pencil. If you've worked with drawing curves like this or drawing shapes, vector shapes and other applications, the pen tool, and then ultimately we're going to use to go in and convert the anchor points over to over into other shapes. So we can take a convert vertex, takes a vertex and changes it from a hard angle, so a corner point, to an actual rounded point as we go in and work with it. So don't think that we are stuck with what's there. We have maximum editing capabilities as we go in and use it. So as we went in, we actually drew what we have inside of here. We're then going to go in and take this and adjust these points as we use them. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add ourselves a background layer to this. So we have our lit marquee 2. Is currently in here and selected. So let's go ahead and come down though to our lit marquee and select that layer inside of our timeline. And then we want to go ahead and do layer, new, solid. Now once we get our settings dialog box that pops up to us, we need to decide what exactly is it that we are doing with this. Now if we want to, you could go ahead and you could name it. We're not going to name this, but we want to go ahead and we want to select ourselves a dark gray color inside of here. So right now it's on black. We can go ahead and come up here as we go through and work with this, and we can adjust what we have just for our black to get to ourselves a dark gray to use. So feel free, move it up as far as you want. Decide just how dark of a gray you want to have with that. Notice that the name automatically changes to dark gray solid. It was black solid 1. Now it's dark gray solid 1. Make sure you go ahead and click on Make Comp Size just to confirm that it's going to go from corner to corner on the entire composition. So we go through and work with the area that we had selected and start to blend or see these come through based on opacity, that we're able to control everything because it's the full size of our composition. So with that said, make sure you're back at the beginning of your, we're going to click OK. Make sure you're back at the beginning of your timeline. So that way we go through and start to work with this and play with what's going to happen as we go through and bring that up. Now right now if you did this, you're probably looking at it going, wait, what's going on? I don't see a lot of stuff. That's because our opacity that was applied to this area is blocking everything off. So we're going to animate that to account for what's going on inside of here. So let's go ahead and select our Lit Marquee 2 layer. And we're going to go ahead and hit M, which just toggles open our mask properties. So you're going to see our mask, and you see mask path indicated by the shape. And what we want to do is we want to go ahead and switch back over to masks and modes. And then what we're going to see on here is that for this mask, these are all our modes. These control each layer, so the whole layer inside of here, that we can go and start to look at what's happening. So down here on our mask, it's currently set to add. So we go ahead and select this, and we come down here and we choose darken. And then we're going to go ahead and click on inverted. So it's going to invert what we have for our mask. So essentially what we want to do is we want to go ahead and work with the area that we have selected being able to be adjusted as we worked in there. Now if we come down here and we look at our dark gray solid, if we go ahead and toggle that open and we start to look at our opacity, well, right now it's at 100%. Well, what happens when we drop that down to 0? So when we go through and work with that, we can set that dark gray solid set to 0 at the very beginning. And let's go ahead and click on the stopwatch, which is going to toggle on the keyframe. So we have our initial keyframe on there. And then let's go ahead and let's move this out to just before the 2-second mark, so at 123. And let's go ahead and let's adjust that opacity just simply to 5%. So if you go through and look at that, you're going to see that it's adding just a little bit. You can see it starting to go through and darken up with that. If we jump out to 409, at this point we want to go ahead and we're going to click on add keyframes. Remember, it's a diamond in between the two of them here. That's just going to set a keyframe at the current value. Since we're after our last keyframe, which was set to 5%, once it hits that keyframe, it's going to at 5%. It's going to hold at 5% all the way through until we indicate a change. Or if we go through and we create a new keyframe, then it'll tween on that keyframe to the next one. So from that first keyframe to the second keyframe goes up from 0% to 5%. From the second to the third, since they're both set at 5, it stays at 5%. And then if we go through and bump this to the 7-second mark now, and we go ahead and we adjust the opacity, in this case to 75%, then what's going to happen with this is it's going to go through now and it goes from 0 to 5, 5 to 5, 5 to 75 as it goes through and moves along there. Now as you go in and start to look at what you have on here, we're going to work a little bit more with the Convert Vertex tool during lesson 7. But we can go ahead if we wanted to. We can come into this mask and you're going to see some of those points are a little bit off and we can see stuff on there. Well, we can go in and we ultimately can move the entire mask, or we can come in here, if you hold down Shift and click on a point and then click back on it, it will allow you to go ahead and move that point around to start to block what's there. We can spend a lot of time going in and adjusting this. When we work with the mask in lesson 7, we will get in really with the convert vertex tool and we will change the mask. But for quick, easy fixes, if you go in, you hover over top of this point, you'll see that it's there. Once you click on a point and hold down shift as you click on it and activate the fact of doing individual points, you no longer have to hold down shift. You can just click point to point and grab a hold of these and move these until you have them set in a way that you want them to be set. So if we were to adjust that, you'll see then that it will allow us to go in and move that down. So now it overlaps that area. There's a little bit here on the top. From going in and creating the shape, this being the first shape, we're not going to worry about exact setting on. So if I go back home and go ahead and hit the space bar for a preview, you'll see the lights come on down below. And then we're going to watch it start to get darker just based upon using a shape over top of it. So in this case, we've gone in and adjusted that mask so it comes in there. That mask sets up just the area that we're seeing, and then as we adjust the opacity on that dark gray solid, it's an easy way to go through and add shadows and highlights are working with a dark shape over top, increase the opacity to make it darker, or we can go through and we can make a white shape over top and increase its opacity to, of course, make it brighter. So once you have those set, you're happy with what's there, let's go ahead and let's save those, and we'll go ahead and we'll close up the properties on there. So at this point, we've created just your basic, straightforward time lapse as we move from start to finish. The other thing we can also go through and look at is remapping time. So we're going to go ahead and we want to duplicate our marquee composition. So I'm simply going to come up here and we're going to go ahead and we're going to take this marquee composition and I'm just going to go ahead and do edit duplicate or Command D, which will allow us to see that we have then a marquee 2 composition. And we're going to use that marquee 2 composition to go ahead and pre-compose it so we can look at going in and creating time remapping. So double click on the marquee 2 composition. It's going to open that down inside of your composition panel and you'll see it inside of your timeline. And we want to go ahead and we want to pre-compose all of these. So we're going to go ahead and select our starburst layer, hold down shift, click on unlit marquee at the bottom of it. So you should have all of your layers selected. And then since we're working with layers, we come up here to layer. When I come down to the bottom, say pre-compose. It's going to come up and ask, what do you want to do with the composition? We can just go ahead and leave it named pre-comp 1. You'll see in here it's going to say move all attributes to new composition. Make sure that is selected. Then we'll simply click on OK, and you'll see it goes in there, creates then our pre-comp. You'll see up inside your project panel, it now says pre-comp 1. Down here inside of our timeline, we see that we have pre-comp 1. That layer should be selected, and then we're going to go and we're going to look at time remapping. So layer, time, and then we have enable time remapping. So what exactly is time remapping? Well, right now as we start to look at what's going on with this as we're working with it, is it's going through and it's playing second 1 at second 1. So it's going through every second is equal to 1 second. Well, we can go ahead and we can adjust what we want to do with that. Oops. Well. Don't click wrong buttons. So we go and we enabled our time remapping. What we're going to do is we're going to take our comp that's down here. So we have our pre-comp 1 set. Let's go ahead and come up here to our layer. We're going to go layer open. So we're going to open the layer. What's going to happen is it's going to open our layer up here. Remember as we went through, if we go in and work with an object, double click on an object inside of our timeline, we can end up with opening up here with an individual layer. So in this case, what we have is we have our layer set up. If you look on the bottom, we're going to see our source time, and we're also looking then at what it is mapped to. So when we go through and play it, you're going to see that all of our keyframes are aligned with one another. So what we're going to do is we want to go ahead and adjust what is going on inside of here. So I can come in here and we can start to adjust what we're seeing. We can adjust where things are happening at. We can start to change what's happening with the time itself. So with that time remap property that's on here, we have a keyframe. So we can change what's happening, when this stuff is happening, and what individual frame is shown at any given time. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and speed up some of these areas. So when we go through and we start out, as we play this across here, what's happening with it is we're still seeing the same time. We look at a keyframe that's here, we're still seeing again same time as we work. But let's go ahead and let's start to adjust or make some adjustments based upon what's happening inside of our time. So let's go to the 2-second mark. And we go through and we start to look at what's happening with our time remap. Is we can come in here and if I adjust this, you're going to see up there on the layer, what's happening with it is this is showing where we at. This is where we're at in the playing mode. This is where it's at in the actual settings. So as we move this time remap value, we're taking whatever time we're currently at and telling it should be at the 4-second mark. So now if we go through and we start to drag this, what's going to happen is you're going to see things are going to actually come up faster as it goes through and starts to play. The other thing, if we go through and you start to look at here, we're seeing the source is currently at the 4-second mark. Our regular play is at 1:19. So as we go through and we start to adjust those. So this allows us to speed up, slow things down. If you happen to put a keyframe in, which this keyframe right here, when I went up and was playing with the source time up there, talking about how it worked, you'll see I added a keyframe to it. So in this case, it's showing me currently at the 6-frame mark. It's actually at the zeros. I can actually come in if I select that one at that point, I can hit delete and I can get rid of that keyframe that was sitting there at that point. So now when I go through and run it, notice it's holding on that 4-second mark because of the keyframe that I had in there. So if you go through and set that, you will need to go back and reset that keyframe back to 0. So the 0-second mark is at 0. So now when it moves from there to the 2-second, that's a 4-second change in the video that I already created, but it's only happening over 2 seconds. So things are happening twice as fast. The time remapping is something that you're going to have to play with a little bit to get used to what's happening with it as you go through and change it with the keyframes. So now if we go through and we look at what's there, we have that changing as we go through over time. So we can also go through and start to look, okay, what is it that we want to add to this, adjust to this, put additional ones in. So in doing so, we can go ahead and move this forward to, let's jump up to 6 seconds if we want to and add in points. You can go to the 3-second mark and add in points. So as we go through and we start to decide what is it that we want to go through and adjust with it. If we go in, if we want to, we have the ability to work with our graph editor. So if we do that inside of our timeline, this is our graph editor. If we click on that, and then inside of our time remap, we click on here so that we can actually see this value inside of the graph editor. What you're going to see out here then is how this is going through and changing. You may want to go ahead and toggle this open. So again, it's a tilde key. And we can see as we go through and start to work with it. So from 0, that's how fast it's ramping. Now in a standard setup, when we talk about linear change, it's going to work in a constant slope. Well, we can go through and we can adjust and see where that comes in at. We have full control as we go in here and work. If I bring this out here to the 4-second mark, what I do is I have this point that I can come out here and work. So we can look at what's happening with this. Well, if we want to go ahead and add ourselves in additional points, we can do that out here. So if we come out here to that 3-second mark, if I hold down Command and hover over top of my line, you're going to see the plus. I can zoom in here a little bit. When you hold down the command and go over it, you're going to see the plus come next to it, letting us know that we're going to go in here and work with it. Now it is showing us what time it's currently at on there. But if I click, what it's going to do is going to create me another point. What I can do at that point is I can grab that point then and I can move it. So I can bring it all the way back down here to 0. So you can see there's the 4. And it tells me we're going back at 0 seconds. So it's going to go from where 0, when it moves to at the 2-second timeline mark, it's actually going to be playing to the 4-second mark of my video. When I get to the 4-second mark of my timeline, it's going to come back down to the 0 mark. So as you look at that, what does that do? Well, if we go through and I drag across, you're going to see it's going to ramp up and they're going to go back down. If you go ahead and you play that, you're going to see that essentially they come up, they drop down, come back up, and then it's going to play itself straight across for the rest of it. So if we go through and you work with those and you speed those up, so if you want it to look like they're flickering as they're first coming on, we could make that happen even faster by speeding it up even more so to where at the 1 second mark, we hit 4 seconds. So then there's more of a bounce to what is there. To do that, I could always just grab a hold of that keyframe, and I can bring this keyframe over here. Now, if I hold down Shift as I move it, notice that it's going to constrain that on a height value. So I can bring that over here. I can grab a hold of one from 4, same thing. I can bring that over to the 2-second mark. And then I could go ahead and come back out here and say, now I want to go ahead and add another one in here. Let's bring this up here. So I'm at the 3-second mark. Come out here, add another one. So now when we go through and play it, you're going to see those start to flicker. So it plays. So the marquee lights are flickering, and then once they finish that last flicker, it's going to continue itself across there. So as our ticker is going to come in, it goes through and begins to work from that. So we can go ahead and we can create as many keyframes as we want. We can cause those lights to flicker as much as we want. If you need to, again, view this more, we can go ahead and we can adjust this for our view purpose. The other thing that we have then is we have our keyframes. Remember we talk about ease. So if we go ahead and we start looking at selecting keyframes, down here at the bottom of your screen, you will see ones you're familiar with. So ease, easy ease, easy ease in, easy ease out. So we can go ahead and we can select our keyframes. So in this case, I selected both keyframes. So I selected the first one, held down Shift, selected the second one. And then I went ahead and put the easy ease in for that. So it goes through and works with that. If you want to expand out how much those work on, say, the back side, we can go ahead and we can do that by just dragging these handles. Notice since they are both selected, it is going to change them both at the same time. So if I wanted to drag that out, come over here to the other one and drag that out, you'll see that we can go ahead and we can simplify what's going to happen with these as it eases its way through. You could also make those smaller, so we could drag them over so that we don't have that subtle into the point. It could be a much more abrupt. We can come down here to the other point and we can add to that. And then I'm going to grab this one and go ahead and add an ease on there as it goes. So it's going to ease itself into the ramp. So what's going to happen is it eases into it. Then you'll notice that once again we get to that very linear look to it as it ramps up to that 10-second mark. Now as we go through and start to edit that, there's possibilities. You'll see here where at the 10-second mark, it's still not quite to the 10-second mark. It's going to play itself out at approximately 9.62 seconds when it hits the end of the time. So now if we go ahead and tilt it back down, take this back to the home and play it, you're going to see a little difference in how it's going through, ramping up and down, and then there comes everything across that. So you do have to watch because essentially what's happening is it is going to speed some of this stuff up. So the ticker plays a little bit faster now because of what we've done with adjusting and remapping what is there. You can go ahead, like I said, you can continue to adjust these. So I can grab a hold of that handle, I can bring it in. If you don't like the way that this looks, we can go ahead and we can come in here, adjust these. If you want the first one to be a bit more abrupt, we can do that as it moves. And that's how you can go in, you can work and remap the time with that. Once you're happy with what you have, you can go ahead and you can save that. And you can certainly go back in, add as many keyframes in there as you want to on that time remapping. If you want the lights to flicker faster, certainly shorten up the time on it. But the big thing as we go in here and use this is thinking ahead with the Adobe Photoshop file as you work with it. Remember, you can use a pick whip to go in and map what's happening with a certain value inside of an object. Think about how you use a track mat, corner pins. And then lastly, if you want to then have dynamic control of timing, going in and using the time remap feature for it.